The Appalachian Mountains are not merely a geographical feature on the map of North America, they are an entity. To understand the mysteries we are about to explore, you must first understand the stage upon which they play out. Geologists will tell you that these ridges are older than the Atlantic Ocean. They are older than the rings of Saturn. They are older than bones. Before the first shark swam in the prehistoric seas, these peaks were already tall, jagged, and watching. When you step into the deep timber of the Great Smoky Mountains, or the Blue Ridge, you are stepping into a biological time capsule that has been watching the world turn for 480 million years. In a place this ancient, time does not move in a straight line. It pools in the valleys. It stagnates in the limestone caverns, and it keeps secrets that modern science still struggles to explain. There is a specific phenomenon reported by those who spend their lives in these woods. It is an acoustic anomaly known as a sound shadow. The topography of the Appalachians, the endless rolling ridges, and deep V-shaped hollows creates pockets where sound simply ceases to exist. You can be standing 50 yards away from a screaming man, separated only by a small ridge and a thicket of rhododendrons, and you will hear absolutely nothing. The wind carries the sound up and away, leaving the person on the ground in a bubble of terrified isolation. This geological fact is crucial because it explains how people can vanish from these mountains without a trace. They don't just get lost visually, they get lost acoustically. They scream, and the mountain swallows the sound before it can reach human ears. This leads us to the first, and perhaps most haunting, of our 7 mysteries. It is the case that changed how the National Park Service operates. It is the disappearance of Dennis Martin. To call this a missing person case is an understatement. It is a locked room mystery, where the room is thousands of acres of dense wilderness. The date was June 14, 1969. The location was Spencefield in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It was Father's Day weekend, a time for families, celebration, and tradition. The Martin family, specifically the father, Bill Martin, an architect from Knoxville, had brought his children camping. This was an annual tradition for the Martin family. They were not tourists unfamiliar with the terrain. They knew these woods, they knew the rules. Spencefield is a grassy boulder high-elevation meadow, located right along the Appalachian Trail. On this particular afternoon, the atmosphere was relaxed. The adults were sitting on the grass, chatting and enjoying the scenery. The children's Dennis, who was 6 years old, his older brother, and 2 cousins, were playing a game of hide-and-seek at the edge of the forest. The plan was innocent. The adults were the targets. The boys planned to split up, circle around behind the bushes, and jump out to startle their parents. It was a prank. It was supposed to end in laughter. The 3 other boys went one way. Dennis, wearing a bright red t-shirt that should have been visible for miles against the green foliage, went the other. He stepped behind a bush to flank the adults. The other 3 boys jumped out. They screamed, "Boo!" The parents laughed. They waited for Dennis to jump out from his side. He didn't. Bill Martin waited. 1 minute passed, then 2. He assumed Dennis was just committing to the game, waiting for the perfect moment. But as the silence stretched into 3 minutes, a cold feeling settled in Bill's stomach. He stood up and walked the roughly 200 feet to the bush, where Dennis had been seen just moments before. He walked around the shrubbery. There was nothing there, just the endless, rolling green of the mountains stretching out toward the horizon. Bill began to run down the trail. He ran for nearly 2 miles, screaming his son's name until his voice gave out. But the mountain gave nothing back. There was no cry for help, no sound of a child crying, just the wind in the trees and the terrifying vastness of the Smokies. What followed was the largest search and rescue operation in the history of the National Park Service. It was an effort that, by modern standards, was massive but chaotic. Over 1,400 people descended on Spencefield. This included park rangers, local volunteers, the National Guard, and, most notably, a unit of Green Berets, the elite special forces of the United States Army. They were training nearby and were helicoptered in to assist. You have to understand the scale of this search. We are talking about grid searches where men walked shoulder to shoulder, scouring every inch of the ground. They crawled under logs. They poked into bear dens. They dragged the riverbed. despite heavy rain that moved in hours after the disappearance, turning the trails into mud and washing away potential tracks. The sheer manpower should have found something. A shoe, a shred of that bright red t-shirt, a footprint. But they found absolutely nothing. It was as if Dennis Martin had been lifted bodily into the sky. However, in the deep archives of this investigation, there are two details that turn this tragedy into a nightmare. The first involves the tracking dogs. Experienced bloodhounds were brought to the scene, animals bred for centuries to follow a scent through hell and high water. But searchers reported a disturbing behavior. In certain areas near where Dennis vanished, the dogs would not track. They didn't lose the scent, they refused to work. They would whine, tuck their tails between their legs, and cower. It was a reaction not to a missing child, but to a predator. The second detail is the one that has fueled nightmares for over 50 years. It is known as the Key family sighting. Harold Key and his family were hiking in the park that same afternoon, roughly 6 to 9 miles away from Spencefield. They were near an area known as Sea Creek. They were not aware that a boy had gone missing. As they walked along a creek bed, they heard a sound that stopped them in their tracks. Harold Key described it as an enormous, sickening scream. He said it did not sound like a bobcat or a mountain lion. It sounded like a frightened child screaming for his life. Moments after the scream, Key observed movement in the dense brush up the ridge. He saw a figure. He described it as a man, walking on 2 legs, but moving with a speed and agility that seemed unnatural for the rough terrain. The figure was dark, disheveled, and appeared to be hiding or moving evasively through the shadows of the trees. But the most chilling detail was what the figure was carrying. Key reported that the figure had something slung over its shoulder, something red. At the time, Key thought he had seen a moonshiner or a hermit trying to avoid detection. It wasn't until he saw the news reports about Dennis Martin specifically, the description of the bright red t-shirt, that the pieces fell into place. He contacted the FBI. The FBI investigated the lead. They claimed they determined the sighting was unconnected, referencing a moonshiner in the area. But the files regarding this specific conclusion remain murky and heavily redacted. The official explanation defaulted to the idea that Dennis died of exposure. But exposure leaves a body. Animal attacks leave blood and shredded clothing. A fall leaves physical evidence. Dennis Martin left nothing. This case forces us to confront a terrifying possibility about the Appalachian wilderness. We know that during the Great Depression, and even before, families retreated deep into these mountains to survive. They cut ties with society. They lived in the deep hollows, inbreeding, surviving off the land, and becoming something else. Is it possible that the wild man Harold Key saw was not a myth, but a member of a feral population that has existed in the blind spots of the map for generations? A population that knows how to navigate the sound shadows, moving silently, watching the tourists on the trails like prey. From the terror of the feral wilderness, we move to a mystery that challenges our understanding of physics. We travel to the jagged edge of the Linville Gorge in North Carolina to examine mystery number 2, the Brown Mountain Lights. This is not a campfire story invented for the internet. This is a phenomenon that has been investigated by the United States government. The lights appear as glowing orbs, red, blue, or white, that rise from the mountain ridge. They hover, they dance, and sometimes they shoot up into the sky like fireworks before vanishing instantly. The first recorded written account dates back to a fisherman's report in September 1913 in the Charlotte Daily Observer. However, oral traditions suggest they have been there much longer. The skeptics, of course, have their theories. In the early 20th century, a USGS scientist argued that the lights were merely the headlights of locomotives reflecting over the ridge. A plausible theory, rational and comforting. But the mountain had a rebuttal waiting. In July of 1916, a massive flood devastated western North Carolina. It was a biblical event. The Catawba River swelled to historic levels. Bridges were washed away. Power lines were snapped. Miles of railroad tracks were twisted into scrap metal or buried under tons of mud. The region was cut off from the modern world. There were no trains running. There were no cars on the roads because the roads no longer existed. There was no electricity. The valley was plunged into a total pre-industrial darkness. And it was in this darkness that the locals looked out toward Brown Mountain. Without the interference of man-made light, the phenomenon became clearer than ever. The orbs returned. They rose from the gorge, pulsing with a vibrant red and white luminescence, dancing over a landscape that had been destroyed by water. They moved in silence, mocking the USGS report that lay in some office in Washington. If there were no trains, and no cars, and no electricity, what was generating that light? The leading scientific theory today is piezoelectricity. The geology of Brown Mountain is rich in quartz and magnetite. The theory suggests that the immense tectonic pressure of the Earth is crushing the quartz crystals deep underground, generating a massive electrical charge that discharges into the air as balls of natural plasma. It is, essentially, a geological thunderstorm that comes from the ground up. But science does not account for the behavior. Witnesses claim the lights seem aware. There are reports of the lights reacting to flashlights, blinking back in sequence. There are reports of them following hikers. The Cherokee legends speak of a great battle between the Cherokee and the Catawba tribes near Brown Mountain. The lights are said to be the spirits of Cherokee women, searching the battlefield by torchlight for their fallen husbands and sons. Whether it is geology or ghosts, the Brown Mountain lights remain one of the few phenomena in the Appalachians that you can go and see for yourself. They are there, they are real. The question isn't if they exist. The question is, what are they signaling? If the Brown Mountain lights suggest that the geology of the Appalachians is active, our third mystery suggests that the history of human civilization in these mountains is far older and stranger than our textbooks admit. We travel south to the terminal point of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Georgia, to a place called Fort Mountain. At the summit of this peak, hidden by centuries of overgrowth, stands a structure that defies the accepted timeline of North America. It is a stone wall, 855 feet long. It winds through the forest like a snake, varying in height, built from loose stones fitted together with ancient precision. There is no mortar. There are no clear defensive positions, like arrow slits. It does not look like a fort built by the British, or the Spanish, or the French. When the first European settlers arrived in the region and asked the Cherokee elders who had built the wall, the answer they received was chilling. The Cherokee said, "We did not build this. It belonged to the people who were here before us." This brings us to mystery number 3. The Moon-Eyed People. This is not a ghost story. This is an anthropological mystery rooted in the oral traditions of the Cherokee Nation. According to their history, when the Cherokee migrated into the southern Appalachians, they encountered a race of humanoid beings already living there. They were described as distinctively different from the Native Americans. They were short, stocky, and had pale white skin. They had heavy beards. But their most defining feature was their eyes. They were called the Moon-Eyed People because their large, blue eyes were incredibly sensitive to the sun. They were strictly nocturnal. They could not see well in the daylight, so they lived their lives under the cover of darkness, hunting, building, and waging war only when the moon was high. The legends speak of a long, protracted war between the Cherokee and this pale race. Eventually, the Moon-Eyed People were defeated. But here is the detail that connects this ancient legend to modern horror. They were not wiped out. They were driven out. And they didn't go west. They went down. The folklore claims that the Moon-Eyed People retreated into the vast cave systems that honeycomb the Appalachians. We must remember that this region is home to the Mammoth Cave System in Kentucky, the longest known cave system in the world, with over 400 miles of mapped tunnels and hundreds more that remain unexplored. Geologists admit that the subterranean world of the Appalachians is largely unknown. In the late 1800s, newspapers in Tennessee and Kentucky reported the discovery of strange ancient graveyards containing stone coffins. Inside were the skeletons of very small adult spigma-sized humans, buried with artifacts that did not match local indigenous cultures. These finds were often dismissed or lost to history. But they linger in the archives as physical evidence that something else was here. If a population of humans was forced underground thousands of years ago, how would they evolve? Biology tells us they would lose their skin pigment. They would become smaller to navigate tight passages. Their eyes would adapt to total darkness. When modern hikers report seeing pale crawlers, white, hairless, humanoid creatures scurrying near cave entrances, in the dead of night, or they seeing monsters? Or are they catching a glimpse of a lost branch of humanity that has claimed the underside of the mountain as its own? We leave the ancient mists of legend and move to a sharp, painful reality documented by hundreds of witnesses. We travel west to Adams, Tennessee, to confront a mystery that was anything but silent. This is mystery number 4, the Bell Witch. Most ghost stories are vague, a cold spot in a room, a feeling of unease. The haunting of the Bell family between 1817 and 1821 was a violent physical assault. It is the only case in American history where a supernatural entity is widely credited with committing first-degree murder. It began on the farm of John Bell, a wealthy and respected elder in the community. At first, it was just sounds, scratching on the walls, the sound of heavy chains being dragged across the floorboards. But it escalated rapidly. The entity, which eventually identified itself as a witch named Kate, began to physically attack the family. It pulled the hair of the children. It slapped their faces, leaving visible red handprints that stayed for hours. It stole food from the table. But the entity's true hatred was reserved for the patriarch, John Bell. As word of the haunting spread, visitors flocked to the farm to witness the phenomenon. One of those visitors was General Andrew Jackson, the future President of the United States. Jackson arrived with a wagon train and a group of men, skeptical and ready to expose a hoax. As they approached the property, their wagon suddenly stopped. The wheels locked up. The horses pulled and whipped, but the wagon would not move, as if it were welded to the earth. Suddenly, a disembodied female voice cackled from the bushes, telling them, "All right, General, let the wagon move." The wheels instantly unlocked. After spending a terrifying night at the farm, where his men were pinched and beaten by unseen hands, Jackson was quoted as saying, "I would rather fight the entire British army than face the Bell Witch." The haunting ended in tragedy. John Bell fell into a mysterious sickness. His throat swelled, his facial muscles twitched uncontrollably, and he fell into a coma. On the morning of December 20th, 1820, he was found dead. When the family went to the medicine cupboard, they found a strange vial of black liquid that no one recognized. The voice of the witch boomed through the room, claiming responsibility. "I gave O.L. Jack a big dose of that last night, and that fixed him." To test the liquid, the doctor gave a drop to the family cat. The animal went into convulsions and died instantly. At John Bell's funeral, the attendees reported hearing the witch singing loud, bawdy drinking songs from the air above the grave, disrupting the service. The Bell Witch Cave still exists on the property today. Visitors report camera malfunctions, scratches, and an overwhelming sense of nausea. It serves as a reminder that in the Appalachians, some histories are not just remembered. They are still alive, and they are angry. We leave the ghosts of the 19th century and move forward to Christmas Eve, 1945. We travel to Fayetteville, West Virginia, to a 2-story timber frame home occupied by the Sodder family. This brings us to mystery number 5, the Sodder Children. This case haunts the Appalachian region not because of what was found, but because of what was not found. George and Jenny Sodder were Italian immigrants who had built a successful life in America. They had 10 children. On this night, 9 of them were home. The atmosphere was festive, filled with candy, toys, and anticipation. But there were dark omens preceding this night. Months earlier, a stranger looking for work had pointed to the fuse box at the back of the house and told George, "This is going to cause a fire someday." Another man, an insurance salesman, angry that George refused to buy a policy, shouted, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." George had also been vocal in his criticism of the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, which had angered some local members of the Italian-American community. At 1 a.m., the phone rang. Jenny answered. It was a wrong number, a woman's voice she didn't recognize, followed by a weird, manic laugh and the clinking of glasses. Jenny hung up and went back to bed, but she noticed smoke. The house was on fire. George and Jenny escaped with 4 of their children. They stood outside in the freezing snow, screaming for the other 5 Morris. Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty, who were sleeping in the attic bedrooms. The staircase was already a wall of flames. George, a strong and capable man, ran to grab his heavy ladder, which was always kept in a specific spot against the house. It was gone. He ran to his 2 coal trucks, planning to drive them under the attic window and climb up the cabs to save his children. He had just used the trucks the day before. Neither of them would start. He tried to get water from the rain barrel. It was frozen solid. The family watched in helpless agony as the house burned to the ground in 45 minutes. But the true mystery began the next morning. It was Christmas Day. The fire marshal and the police arrived to sift through the ash. They expected to find the charred remains of 5 children. They found nothing. In a house fire, wood burns at roughly 1,000 to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. While this destroys flesh, it does not destroy bone. Crematoriums burn bodies at much higher temperatures for hours, and even then, bone fragments and teeth remain. It is scientifically impossible for 5 human skeletons to completely vaporize in a 45-minute wood fire. They searched the basement. They sifted the ash. Not a single bone, not a single tooth. The official report claimed the children died in the fire. The Sodder family refused to accept this. They hired private investigators. They found the missing ladder days later, thrown down an embankment away from the house. They discovered the telephone line had been cut cleanly with pliers, not burned through. A witness claimed to have seen balls of fire being thrown onto the roof, suggesting napalm or firebombs. For decades, a billboard stood on Route 16, paid for by George Sodder, featuring the photos of the 5 missing children. It became a haunting landmark. Then, in 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jenny Sodder received a letter in the mail. It was postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photo of a man in his mid-20s. He looked hauntingly like her missing son, Louis. On the back, a cryptic message was handwritten. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Ill boys, and 90132. The Sodder Children mystery suggests a conspiracy that involved kidnapping, arson, and a decades-long cover-up. Did those children die that night? Or were they watched, taken, and forced to live new lives while their parents mourned an empty grave? From the horror of human malice, we travel north to the banks of the Ohio River, to the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. This is mystery number 6, the Mothman. While pop culture depicts the Mothman as a monster movie creature, the reality of what happened in Point Pleasant between November 1966 and December 1967 is a study in mass hysteria and high strangeness. It wasn't just a sighting, it was an infestation of the impossible. It began on a cold night in November, near an abandoned World War II explosives manufacturing site known as the TNT area. 2 young couples were driving near the bunkers when they saw a figure standing in the road. They described it as a man, nearly 7 feet tall, but grey, hairless, and possessing massive wings folded against its back. But the detail that haunts the witnesses to this day was the face, or rather, the lack of one. The creature had no head. Its eyes glowing, hypnotic red orbs were set deep into its chest. As the couples sped away in terror, reaching speeds of over 100 miles per hour, the creature chased them. It didn't flap its wings. It simply rose into the air and glided effortlessly above their car, keeping pace with mechanical precision. Over the next 13 months, the town of Point Pleasant was under siege. Over 100 credible witnesses, including police officers, firemen, and church leaders, reported seeing the bird. But the horror wasn't limited to the creature. The town experienced a wave of poltergeist activity. Phones ringing with strange metallic shrieks, and visits from men in black. Strange, pale men who spoke in mechanical voices and threatened witnesses into silence. The atmosphere in the town became heavy with a sense of impending doom. People reported terrible nightmares of drowning and steel twisting. Then, on December 15, 1967, the prophecy fulfilled itself. At 5 p.m. During the height of the Christmas rush hour, the Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant to Ohio, suddenly groaned. A microscopic fracture in a suspension eye-bar gave way. The chains snapped. In seconds, the massive steel structure folded like a house of cards and collapsed into the freezing waters of the Ohio River. 46 people died in the wreckage. After the tragedy, the Mothman was never seen again. This has led to the chilling theory that the creature was not a predator, but an omen. Was it trying to warn the town of the disaster? Or was it attracted to the negative energy of a tragedy that was destined to happen? To this day, the TNT area remains a place of deep unease, where the line between cryptozoology and the paranormal is blurred. And finally, we arrive at mystery number 7. This is not a single event, frozen in time like the Sodder fire or the Bell Witch haunting. This is an active, evolving phenomenon that is currently spreading through the folklore of the entire Appalachian range. It is the mystery of the not deer, and the predator known as the mimic. For generations, hunters in Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina have told stories about deer that do not behave like deer. At a glance, they look normal. They have the right coat, the right antlers, and the right shape. But upon closer inspection, the anatomy is wrong. Witnesses describe them as having joints that bend backward, necks that are too thick or too long, and a muscular structure that suggests raw power rather than agility. But the most terrifying aspect is the eyes. A deer is a prey animal. Its eyes are on the sides of its head to detect danger. The not deer is reported to have eyes that face forward binocular vision, like a wolf, a bear, or a human. Forward-facing eyes are the mark of a predator. When a normal deer is spooked, it runs. It flashes its white tail and flees. The not deer does not run. It stands its ground. It stares. Hunters have reported shooting these creatures at point-blank range, only to watch them trot away with a mechanical, jerky movement, unbothered by the impact. It occupies the space known as the uncanny valley. It looks almost right, but the slight errors trigger a primal revulsion in the human brain. This biological horror ties into a broader, darker aspect of Appalachian high strangeness, auditory mimicry. There is a golden rule known to anyone who was raised in the deep hollows. If you hear your name called in the woods, do not answer. If you hear a baby crying in a remote thicket miles from the nearest road, do not investigate. And if you hear a woman screaming for help, lock your doors. Biologically speaking, mimicry is a survival trait. We see it in birds that imitate other animals to protect their nests. We see it in insects. But the Appalachian report suggests there is a predator in these mountains that has evolved to mimic us. Search and rescue teams have reported hearing the voice of a missing child responding to them, leading them deeper into dangerous terrain, only for the voice to suddenly shift direction or vanish entirely, as if leading them into a trap. Seasoned hikers have reported hearing their hiking partner calling for help from deep in the woods, only to turn around and find their partner standing right next to them, silent. The voice is often described as flat or metallic, like a recording being played back, without the emotional nuance of a real human. This suggests intelligence. It suggests that something in these ancient mountains has learned that the easiest way to catch a human is to appeal to their empathy. A human will run from a roar, but they will run toward a cry for help. The Appalachians are the oldest mountains on Earth. They have worn down from jagged peaks to rolling hills over 480 million years. They have seen the rise and fall of dinosaurs, the ice ages, and the spread of humanity. They are patient, and they are indifferent to our safety. From the vanishing of Dennis Martin to the impossible fire of the Sodder Children. From the watchers on Brown Mountain to the warning of the Mothman. These 7 mysteries remind us of a humbling truth. We have mapped the geography, but we have not mapped the reality. When you enter these woods, you are stepping into an ecosystem that does not play by our rules. We build our roads, we set up our trail cameras, and we tell ourselves we are the masters of this land. But the things that live in the sound shadows know better. So, the next time you find yourself on a quiet trail in the Great Smoky Mountains, and the forest suddenly goes silent, keep walking, don't look back, and whatever you do, never answer the voice calling your name.